I wanna be evil, I wanna be mad, but more than that, I wanna be bad. I wanna be evil and trump an ace, just to see my partner's face.
Hey, welcome to Half the Battle. It's a big one today, folks, as we'll be tackling one of the main characters from G.I. Joe.
Namely, the Baroness.
I'll admit to being a bit nervous here.
After all, let's face it, nobody really gives a crap about guys like Airwave. But we're dealing with a beloved character everybody, even a non-Joe fan, knows.
So let's start, like we always do, with the toys from the original G.I. Joe line. I'm sure it'll be a long and storied dissertation on all the different takes we got of the Baroness during the original line from 1982 to 1994. Just the one, huh? Well, this may go a little faster than I had anticipated.
Yeah, this is gonna come up a lot when dealing with G.I. Joe figures of women, even the really important characters. You see, G.I. Joe was a line for boys, and of course, Hasbro execs figured that boys don't want to play with toys of girls. That's because of the whole cooties outbreak of the early 80s.
It was a horrible time for young boys, when even being in the presence of anything remotely related to girls could lead to a terminal cootie infestation.
It wasn't until the late 90s when the Junior Center for Disease Control found an effective treatment for the source of the cooties outbreak. It mostly involved pulling a girl's hair and then quickly running away. But in all seriousness, yeah, Hasbro figured boys wouldn't want to play with a toy of a girl, so they not only created very few female characters, but they also released them in more limited quantities, and often only one version of them for the entire 12-year run. We only got one version of the Baroness, Covergirl, Jinx, and Zorana. Same thing goes for Lady J. And Scarlet, well, she got a whopping 2 different figures. This is a sort of chicken and the egg thing. Did boys play less with girl figures, so the toy companies produced less of them? Or did the lack of availability meant that boys couldn't find these toys to play with in the first place?
Oh, and by the way, we're lucky that we even have one figure of the Baroness. You see, she wasn't created by Hasbro. She was created by Marvel.
As I discussed in my Operation Lady Doomsday review way back when, she first appeared in issue 1 of the G.I. Joe comic. She later then crossed over into the cartoon universe at the very start of the G.I. Joe cartoon in the miniseries The Mass Device. So she was part of both the comic and the cartoon from the very start, but not of the toy line. She wouldn't get a toy until 1984, when we got her first and only version in the toy line. Also, do you notice anything different? The early version of the Baroness, in both the comic and the cartoon, had her in a blue outfit. When it came to making the toy though, for some reason designers at Hasbro went a whole different way. Yeah, Marvel didn't come up with that dominatrix librarian look. That leather outfit, that's all Hasbro's idea.
Freaks.
So later, the comic and cartoon designs were updated to reflect the new, hotter look that would dropkick young boys everywhere towards puberty. The figure itself is quite excellent. I really like the molded hair. It's a definite improvement on doing hair from earlier head sculpts, like Scarlet and Covergirl. Not counting the Cobra emblem, her entire outfit is black, with no highlights in other colors. While I feel that this works for the figure, I would have liked to have seen some of those little sculpted details all over to be painted in, like, for example, the Cobra symbols on her lower arm. The 2 accessories she comes with are a mixed bunch. The rifle is too big and unwieldy. I have a real fear that it will break the thumbs of the figure if you place it in the hands. I would have preferred a pistol and maybe a dagger for weapons. The backpack, on the other hand, is excellent. It's unobtrusive, doesn't cause balance issues because it's so small, and has a great molded Cobra logo.
And that was the only appearance of the Baroness in the original toy line. That's a bit weak, so I think I'll talk about a few of her later versions too.
In 1997, she finally got a second figure in the Toys R Us exclusive Collector's Edition line. While much of this line suffered from disastrous quality control issues, this figure is actually quite nice. And hey, at least this one can stand on its own. The color scheme, being predominantly blue here, matches more with her first appearances in the comic and cartoon. And improvements in paint application technology meant that she has more painted details, like the clasps on her shoulder, and yes, the cobra symbols on her lower arms. Finally! Even the little symbol on her belt is painted in. It's a very detailed paint job. Which is why I can't understand why they didn't bother to paint the metal rivets on the shoulders and elbows. I mean, this technology has been available since the toy line began. It's a real shame they took this cost-cutting measure, since the unpainted rivets really clash with an otherwise fine paint job.
Next, I feel the overwhelming urge to talk about a Baroness figure that's not actually the Baroness. And for this, we have to go back. Back to the future. All the way to the year 2000. In the year 2000. In the year 2000. Stop that. We're not doing that bit this time. And turn the lights back on in your room.
Anyway, yeah, in the year 2000, the G.I. Joe toy line got relaunched. It was back, and it was big. There were issues, though.
First and foremost, Hasbro had gotten sloppy with keeping copyrights and trademark of their own stuff, so they had to improvise.
That's why, instead of General Hawk, we got General Tomahawk. Same guy, different codename. This had even happened before in 1998, when Thunder became Thunderwing.
Yeah, things got weird, and none weirder than the Baroness.
This figure, using the Baroness mold, is not the Baroness. It's a completely different character, called Chameleon, and she is actually the illegitimate half-sister of the Baroness.
Okay, and believe it or not, it gets weirder.
You see, the Baroness was severely injured in an attack and required plastic surgery. During this time, Chameleon presented herself to the G.I. Joe team, offering to have plastic surgery as well and replace the Baroness, becoming a deep cover spy. And that's just what they did. By the way, this attack actually really did happen in the original comics, way back in issue 16. The Baroness is trapped in a his tank as it explodes, leaving her severely injured and burned. So, according to this file card, at this point, we never see the Baroness again, but instead we see her half-sister double agent. You know, that's the biggest frickin' retcon since Luke and Leia turned out to be siblings. It just doesn't work. At all.
Unfortunately, this completely crazy bit of continuity has been completely swept under the rug, so we can safely ignore it.
I don't understand why they didn't just go the same route they took with the other character they lost the copyrights to, like Tomahawk. Just call her the Baroness Anastasia or the Baroness de Cobre. That was her real name anyway. But no, instead of that we got a convoluted mess of a retcon pulled straight out of Hasbro's ass.
2002 brought us a Baroness figure with legs that just wouldn't quit. And that's a bad thing.
Yeah, for the first time the Baroness got a brand new sculpt, and it is awful. The proportions are way off. The legs are far too long compared to the torso, something other figures from this year suffered from as well. It looks particularly goofy when you place it next to a figure of the regular line. Also, the neck is way too thin, and for some reason, they decided to give her purple specks in her hair. What is even the hell?
The last time I saw that purple specked color scheme was...
And you know what? Let's not even go there. In 2004, we got a comic 3-pack that included the Baroness. Like the 1997 version, this one was made to more closely resemble her earlier appearances. Well, that makes sense considering it's a comic tie-in figure. And they did a pretty good job of it. The only problem with the figure are the glasses. The removable glasses. Yeah, I think their ambitions outgrew their capability here a bit. There is nothing wrong with molded on glasses, especially when the removable ones you come up with looks not like glasses as much as they do as goggles. As far as the movie toy goes, well, I've already said my piece about that way back when, but it bears repeating. Much like the 2002 version, I hate these proportions. They're both so freaking thin, it's sickening. This is not what women look like, Hasbro! The original proportions were just fine. These things look less like a terrorist intelligence agent and more like Barbie's first bulimia bout. Ugh. Well, that's about all I have to say about the toys. I know I left a bunch of them out, but my show usually only deals with the toys and characters from the original line. I included a few later incarnations because, well, shamefully, the Baroness only got one freaking toy in 12 freaking years. So let's go to the file card. The only file card she got in 12 years. Yup, still bitter about that.
This file card is unique, in much the same way that the character is unique.
Like I mentioned before, the Baroness was an original character created by Marvel, and more specifically by Larry Hama, who wrote most of the comic issues as well as most of the file cards.
Since the toy was created years after the character, this meant that Larry could actually add background information from the comic to the file card instead of the other way around.
Making this the only card from the original line that has spoilers about the comic in it.
As far as I know. Yeah, remember, like I said before, I don't have all the file cards memorized, so feel free to correct me. Just remember, I'm only talking about the file cards from the original toy line.
Anyway, the spoilers in question refer to her accident I mentioned last week. The card mentioned the attack that left her burned and the plastic surgery she had. No mention of a half-sister though, thank God. The file card establishes her origins as being the spoiled offspring of wealthy European aristocrats, though it never gets more specific than that.
Please be Belgium, please be Belgium, please be Belgium.
But no, her accent really doesn't seem to support that. At all. In the alternate continuity of the British Action Force comics, however, her parents are supposed to be Austrian. Well, that does fit better.
So, if you want to go with that, you at least have a small sliver of canon to back it up.
She's also supposed to be the only one who knows the secret identity of Destro. Yeah, that bit of information is now really out of date, since, well, everybody now knows practically all there is to know about Destro. His name, what he looks like, his backstory, his relatives, his social security number, and what his favorite race and class in World of Warcraft is.
It's Orc Warrior, in case you're wondering.
Lastly, in her youth, the Baroness went from mere student radicalism to full-blown international terrorism, and eventually joined Cobra. Her only weakness seems to be dividing her loyalties between Destro and Cobra Commander.
So, that was the first and only file card. It tells us that she becomes a radical and a terrorist, but it doesn't tell us why.
We do get an explanation on the file card of the 1997 Collector's Edition, though. That was easy, since the writers of those cards had the entire 12-year run of the comic to work with. This file card tells us that during the Southeast Asian conflict, her and her brother were there to offer humanitarian aid. Things went south, and her brother ended up dead. The Baroness believed a United States soldier killed him. This ignited her hatred for all things related to the government in general, and the military in particular, sending her on her path to Cobra.
By the way, Southeast Asian conflict? Yeah, it doesn't specify, but they meant the Vietnam War.
In fact, a bunch of characters from G.I. Joe have had their origins set in the Vietnam War. This can be a bit of a problem since, even if everything is set at the ass end of the war, and everybody lied about their age to get in, all of them are still in their 50s at the youngest today.
Sometimes franchises last longer than the original creators had intended or even dared hope. And some of these franchises go to great length to try and explain all the sort of time discrepancies that tend to pop up solely because their saga has been going on for so damn long.
Star Trek, for example, had an episode almost 50 years ago where it became clear Earth went through the devastation of the eugenic wars in the mid-90s. Written in the 60s, they had no idea they'd still be making Star Trek in some form or another 30 years later. As a result, there have been a number of novels and comics carefully explaining that those wars did in fact take place, but in secret. Or in another universe. Or all in the head of that kid from St. Elsewhere.
With G.I. Joe, I say just ignore it. Accept all the anachronisms and simply move on. Really.
Speaking of moving on, let's get to her comic appearances.
And here I run into a small problem. You see, as a main character, she's all over the damn comic. So, talking about her could spoil the entire comic run for you.
So, I'm just gonna give you the broad strokes, with some details thrown in here and there. There will be spoilers though, especially regarding the end of the comic. First and foremost, she is one hell of a schemer. Going through her story arcs, it reads less like a comic book and more like Game of Freaking Thrones. She's always involved in one plot or another.
Let me sum it up real quick for you.
She plots with Cobra Commander against G.I. Joe. She then plots with Major Blood against Cobra Commander. She then plots with Destro to kill Storm Shadow. She plots with Major Blood again to kill Cobra Commander. She sides with Serpentor against Cobra Commander. Then sides with Cobra Commander, who isn't really Cobra Commander, against Serpentor. Then her and Destro take over Cobra from the fake Cobra Commander. And finally she sides with Destro and G.I. Joe against Cobra in between being brainwashed.
Confused? Yeah, go read the comic. All of it. Or, wait until my comic reviews hit the story arcs. Either way, you're gonna be busy for a while.
In a nutshell, what you should take away from all of that is that there's two things that really motivate her in the comic. Power and revenge. And sometimes a combination of both. If she thinks changing sides will give her more power, she's all over that. If she feels wronged in some way, whoever dicked her over better have eyes in the back of their heads. In stark contrast to that is her loyalty and love for Destro. She'll involve him in her plot, sure, sometimes in fact dragging him along kicking and screaming to get him more power and glory too. And if somebody moves against Destro, they'll have to deal with the Baroness too. And she goes very far in this. Remember that accident which left her burned that I've mentioned about 3 times now? Yeah, that was caused when she thwarted an attempt on Destro's life. Later, she flew a plane over enemy territory for the sole reason of dropping a wreath at a location where Destro died.
Don't worry, he got better.
Other things of note she got up to include killing Storm Shadow.
Don't worry, he got better too.
She also helped a usurper take on the mantle of Cobra Commander. She could do that because at that point she was the only person who knew what a real Cobra Commander actually looked like. By telling everybody that the fake commander was the real thing, she could, at least briefly, become the power behind the throne. This was actually the closest that she'd come to leading Cobra herself in the comics. And even then, only kinda sorta, since, at that point in time, Serpentor was still around and the de facto co-leader of Cobra.
Here's the thing about all the plots and schemes that she got up to. It was never just her.
She was always scheming with someone, and it was always a man. You could argue that this was actually very clever, This way, she always had somebody to take the fall for her, or be the target when they'd become in charge of things. That's all fine and good, however, it bugs me. It bugs me that she always needs a guy to help her achieve her goals. I wish she had done more stuff just on her own. Anyway, at various points in the comic, both her and Destro get fed up with all the intrigue and drama and leave Cobra behind them, giving them periods of relative peace.
But every time...
Just when I thought I was out, they pull me back in.
Yeah, she always finds herself having to deal with Cobra again.
Finally, we come to the end of her story in the comic run.
And it sucks ass. To understand why it's so craptastic, you'd have to have followed her entire journey throughout the comic.
She started off mistakenly blaming her brother's death on an American GI. That turned out to be Snake Eyes, by the way. Yeah, everybody in the whole freaking comic is connected to him in some way. Anyway, this put her on a path of hatred and terrorism, but after finding love with Destro and learning the truth about her brother's death, she reformed. Kind of, anyway. And near the end, seemed to be able to finally get away from her previous life in general, and Cobra in particular.
Right up until the final damn story arc in the comic.
In this arc, she gets strapped into the brainwave scanner, a Cobra device that acts like a giant goddamn reset button. This device is capable, amongst many other things, of brainwashing its subjects. As such, the Baroness, as well as several other important characters by the way, get their minds altered so they become loyal allies of Cobra again.
So, after 12 goddamn years of character development, 12 years of following a life story full of changes, everything gets reset to day freaking 1. And that's where the comic ends. No! Bad comic! No cookie!
Sure, years and years later, the story would go on. But in 1994, that was it. That's how they ended. What a craptacular ending. So, that was the Baroness in the comic. I'd say it's worth reading the entire run just for the Baroness alone. So, let's see what she's like in the cartoon. Now, in earlier episodes, her main function seems to be Master of Disguise, and she's quite good at it. If you see a woman you haven't seen before in the cartoon, 9 times out of 10, yep, that's the Baroness in disguise. And hey, even if you see a guy that you've never seen before, yep, there's still a chance it's her. Yeah. She started out in the blue outfit, the same one she had in the comics, but it got switched to the leather fetish fuel outfit in the second miniseries, The Revenge of Cobra. Later on in the Sunbow series, Zorana took over as Master of Disguise, so the Baroness, unfortunately, was relegated to the background a bit more.
True to her comic incarnation, she is motivated by revenge. Yeah, if you piss her off, chances are it's not gonna end well for you.
If you remember my Halloween review, one of the reasons that Cobra Commander's plot failed was because he slighted the Baroness, so, of course, she went off and informed the Joes of his plans. The best example, though, comes in the episode Skeletons in the Closet, where Destro is getting a little too friendly with a female Cobra trooper.
Yes, the Baroness and Destro are an item in the cartoon too.
To make a long story short, since I'll be reviewing this episode later this year, the Baroness is incensed by this, and through many machinations, she ends up being responsible for burning Destro's ancestral home to the ground.
You truly do bring ill fortune to men.
Ill fortune? It's revenge, you faithless beast.
What?
I arranged it all. I led the Joe agent here knowing this would be the result.
Baroness! But why?
Why? To make you pay for your unfaithfulness with that which you value most. Your ancestral home.
Jeez, lady, hell hath no fury indeed.
In the Deke cartoon, she is a little more mellow, probably because the Deke series only paid a little lip service to the original cartoon. In fact, in the opening miniseries, Operation Dragonfire, Destro dumps her for Zorana for no good reason. It's completely baffling to me. And instead of unleashing the full fury of hell, as I would have expected her to do, the Baroness takes this rather well and just waits till she is in a position of power and says she'll share this new power with Destro as long as he dumps Zorana.
And that whole subplot was just weird. But she did do one thing in that cartoon that every single G.I. Joe fan should be eternally grateful for.
You see, Cobra Commander had been turned into a snake in the cartoon movie. Yeah, just go with it. And here, the Baroness turns him human again. She undoes the infuriating, completely freaking idiotic plot point of Cobra Commander being a snake, and she returns him to his rightful place as leader of Cobra.
For this action alone, the Baroness is the greatest hero in the cartoon universe, and a grateful fanbase can only salute her for a job well done. God bless you, Anastasia. God bless you.
Let's see, what's next? Yeah, so now we come to the live action movie. Okay, first of all, be warned, there's gonna be major spoilers here. The Baroness in the movie actually starts off well enough. She's cold, professional, and effective, with a strong connection to Destro. It seems like we're getting just what we'd expected and hoped. The Baroness like we remember her.
That gets flushed down the crapper pretty quickly, though.
You see, first of all, Duke recognizes her and uses this information to get himself a spot on the Joe team. And guess what? It turns out he and the Baroness used to date.
Yeah.
In fact, they were engaged.
Yeah.
Turns out she was his best friend's sister and used to be a blonde, but apparently dyed her hair later.
So, what happened to turn her from an all-American girl, and Duke's fiancée no less, to the evil Baroness?
Well, her brother, who was a soldier in the same unit as Duke, was killed on a mission. And I'll tell you what happened next in a little bit, and believe me, it's incredibly stupid. But first, let me tell you how it should have gone. You know what would have been a great origin story? If her brother's death had put her on a dark path towards evil and terrorism, just like it did in the comic, with her blaming her brother's death on the military in general, and Duke in particular. This could have led to her eventually teaming up with Destro and Cobra. But nope. You wanna know how she became the Baroness? Brainwashing.
It's always goddamn brainwashing with her. And it never fails to piss me off. Yep, she was brainwashed by Cobra Commander.
Who it turns out is her brother. The dead one. Yep, in this reality, Cobra Commander and the Baroness are siblings. Yeah, my joke about Luke and Leia in part 1, that was actually unintentional foreshadowing. Turns out her brother found her to be an emotional wreck after his supposed death, and thought the best option would be to brainwash her into becoming evil.
Instead of, oh, I don't know, telling her that he was alive.
So, in the span of one movie, using flashbacks I'll grant you, She goes from being Duke's fiancée to being the brainwashed Baroness, to breaking out of said brainwashing and being sent to the Joe's prison hospital. You know, I could have swallowed her being Duke's fiancée, and I don't even mind that she used to be a blonde. But this, in combination with her brother being Cobra Commander, and the brainwashing on top, it's just too damn much.
Changing a few things, well, that's fine. It's a movie adaptation after all. But changing this much? That's like if in the movie Titanic, the boat was actually a spaceship. But nobody's stupid enough to ever do that.
Attention all passengers. The Titanic is now in orbit above Sol 3, also known as Earth. Population, human. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Christmas.
I stand corrected.
So, that was the Baroness in the cartoon and movie. Yes, my friends, at long last we come to the end.
You know, I just realized that if you don't particularly like the Baroness, this has been a few crappy weeks for you. Well, can't be helped. Here's my conclusion.
As far as the toy goes, while I do find it a real pity we only got a single figure of her in 12 years, the one we got was excellent. And to me, to this day, is the quintessential Baroness figure, especially since the figures from later years were more miss than hit. In the comic, she had a complex journey full of twists and turns, and I highly recommend checking it out. Just skip the brainwashing part. I hate brainwashing. Her portrayal in the cartoon was quite excellent as well, though I could have done with a different backstory in the live-action movie. All in all, the character of the Baroness is a triumph on nearly all levels, and one of the reasons G.I. Joe was so successful. And it's a credit to Larry Hama that a character he came up with ended up being featured in a toy line, 2 cartoon series, and a live-action movie.
Well, that's about all I have to say about the Baroness. Jeez, I haven't talked about a girl this much since high school. I said about, not two. Anyway, join us next week when we'll be closing out our impromptu Baroness month with a cartoon episode that focuses on both her and the women of G.I. Joe. See you next week, everybody!
Like something that shakes its lever. I wanna go to the devil, I wanna be evil. I wanna spit tax, I wanna be evil and cheat at jacks. I wanna be wicked, I wanna tell lies. I wanna be mean and throw my ties. I want to wake up in the morning with that